Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
I appreciate you tuning in, whether it's on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, or wherever you podcast. An item that was in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's daily Politically Georgia blog caught my attention, and it, as I mentioned before, I leave tabs open. I kept the tab open, and then I saw something else in today's Politico Playbook that made me remember that I had this tab open, and I'm going to weave the two together for you. This show, in its intent, covers Atlanta-based politics, along with Georgia, and, of course, U.S. and international. From a left-of-center point of view, I don't hide that. But the reason I mentioned the scope is because this was something of a local story that had some national relevance. And with Donald Trump stomping into D.C. today to meet with congressional Republicans, it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of these conversations. The Political Playbook folks believe that today's assemblage is supposed to be a forward-thinking, vision-ahead sort of thing. But it's Donald Trump who has grievances and, well, he has acolytes throughout the party who are willing to trash the system in order to appease his grievances. It's stunning. It really is. For anyone who likes history, follows, I mean, what was it? I've been watching the Ben Franklin series on Apple TV. Fantastic dramatization. Fantastic job by Michael Douglas portraying Ben Franklin. I mean, I don't know what Ben Franklin was really like, obviously, but I think it's an appropriate adaptation. Anyway, anyone who is a student, a perpetual student of history, has to just kind of sometimes take a step back and look at the entire picture, the entire canvas, and just be mesmerized at how snapped in place and in lockstep Donald Trump has much of the Republican Party. A man who, when he ran for president, never got beyond 50% in states' primaries until he was the last man running, essentially, who does not have the full support of his party's voters today. Nikki Haley's still getting votes in the primaries, y'all. Instead, has nearly the full weight and support of the Republican Party, save for a Jeff Duncan or a Ken Buck here or there. It's and because he has so much grip on the party, he is a convicted felon who will be their nominee. And they are about to make efforts to trash our judicial system to placate him. The party of states' rights, for example, is willing to put some federal weight. Big brother, right? They hate the federal government weighing in on state and local stuff, ... unless it's to come after a local or a state prosecutor, but only in the case of defending Donald Trump. Or is it? So it was in Tuesday's Politically Georgia blog, co-written by Greg Bluestein, Tia Mitchell, Patricia Murphy, and Adam Van Brimmer, that the blog began as Brian Jack barnstormed across Georgia's 3rd District with other Donald Trump loyalists on Monday. A rare policy difference between him and his runoff opponent emerged. Can you guess who's at the center of that? At stops before large cheering crowds in Fayetteville and Concord, Jack backed federal efforts to defund local prosecutors who brought criminal charges against the former president and his allies. Vowing to use the power of the purse if elected in next week's runoff, the former Trump aide mentioned the New York hush money conviction and the pending election interference case in Atlanta. In Manhattan and Fulton County, you're seeing challenges with Democratic prosecutors bringing these cases against President Trump and his allies, Brian Jack said in an interview. Funding should go to our southern border. It shouldn't go to prosecuting political opponents. Small problem with that. Fani Willis' office is funded by Fulton County taxes. Alvin Bragg's office funded by New York State taxes. Is Uncle Sam coming for that money? Or just withholding money that they contribute from the federal level? His runoff opponent, former Georgia Senate Majority Leader Mike Dugan, also has attacked lawfare, air quotes there, what he described as a weaponized justice system, but doesn't back direct cuts to prosecutors involved in Trump-related trials. Instead, he said, we should enforce and strengthen oversight into prosecutorial misconduct. Not the misconduct of a former president who incited an insurrection on January 6th, mind you. I mean, we tried that. We even had Republicans on that panel. But these two and their sycophants, they weren't for that kind of oversight into misconduct. No. They want to go after the judicial system that seeks to bring justice to anyone guilty of inciting insurrections or attempting to overturn election results. This is stunning. Again, the Law and Order Party, y'all. And they're willing to dismantle our justice system at the federal, state, or even the local prosecutorial level to ensure that someone so obviously guilty on so many fronts can have his, record expunged. Okay, back to the Politically Georgia blog here. Brian Jack took much the same stance as House Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan, an Ohio Republican and top Trump ally who joined Jack on the campaign trail and drew an ovation when he promised to continue using his subpoena power to scrutinize Fulton County District Attorney, the nefarious Fani Willis. So that nugget was in Tuesday's Politically Georgia blog. Today in the Politico Playbook, compiled by Rachel Bade, Eugene Daniels, and Ryan Lizza. They set us up for today's antics, which will be in Washington, where Donald Trump is going to be stamping in. In just a couple of hours, they write Donald Trump will make his first visit to the Hill since leaving the presidency and since the violence of January 6th, addressing House Republicans at the Capitol Hill Club before meeting with Senate Republicans over at NRSC headquarters. The agenda, we're told, according to the Politico Playbook writers, will be resolutely forward-looking. A potential 2025 legislative agenda will be a central focus with tax policy, foreign relations, and entitlements all teed up for discussion. That's the plan, anyway, the Politico Playbook writers opine. The reality is that Trump, true to his nature, has been obsessed in recent weeks with harnessing the powers of Congress to fight on his behalf, not yours and mine, on his behalf, and go to war against the Democrats he accuses of, quote, weaponizing the justice system against him. The same weaponized justice system, by the way, that just convicted the president's son, but I digress. It's a campaign he orchestrated in the days after his May 31st conviction on 34 felony counts in New York, according to the Politico Playbook, starting with a phone call to the man he wanted to lead it, Speaker Mike Johnson, Mr. Pious Religious Mike Johnson. Again, it's breathtaking to watch as people you think, or they want you to think, are ideologically pure, moralistic human beings, faithful men and women, and when I say faithful, faithful to their nation, faithful to their church, to their God. Only it seems we're finding out who their God is. Back to the playbook. Trump was still angry when he made the call, according to those who have heard accounts of it from Johnson, dropping frequent F-bombs as he spoke with the soft-spoken and pious GOP leader. We have to overturn this, Trump insisted. Johnson, of course, sympathized with Trump's frustrations. He'd been among the first batch of Republican lawmakers to appear alongside Trump at the Manhattan trial. And by the way, there's the rhetoric that Jill Biden, Dr. Jill Biden, the First Lady of the United States, appearing at Hunter Biden's trials was somehow an attempt, this is from the right now, somehow an attempt to intimidate the jury. But when Mike Johnson and Matt Gaetz and all the other clowns in Congress were swooping down to Manhattan to appear in the gallery, nothing. Anyway, he'd been harping, Mike Johnson, on DA Alvin Bragg's case and the alleged broader abuse of the justice system since before he took office. And by office, I mean the House speakership, the gavel. The speaker didn't really need to be convinced, one person familiar with the conversation said. Johnson, a former attorney himself, already believed the House had a role to play in addressing Trump's predicament. The two have since spoken on the subject multiple times, but sympathy can only go so far, the playbook writes. With a slim majority and skittish swing district members, Johnson is already finding it difficult to deliver for Trump. Republicans have all but abandoned their effort to impeach President Joe Biden. Bless them for trying and continuing to. I mean, James Comer still goes to Fox News and makes wild and surreptitious claims with no evidence. Anyway, Republicans have all abandoned their effort to impeach President Joe Biden as Trump wants. Yesterday's contempt vote against Attorney General Merrick Garland squeaked by only after an intense whipping effort, and now a series of proposals targeting what Republicans call rogue prosecutors, in other words, those investigating Trump, appear to have a wobbly future. House GOP leaders, for instance, spent yesterday afternoon whipping a bill written by Representative Russell Fry from the 7th District of South Carolina. I used to live there. He replaced Tom Rice, who voted to impeach Donald Trump as a Republican back in 2021, which is why Russell Fry is there now. So anyway, House GOP leaders, for instance, spent yesterday afternoon whipping a bill written by Russell Fry from South Carolina that would allow presidents charged at the state level to move those cases to federal court, effectively nullifying the power of officials like Bragg and Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis. The bill was filed in April 2023 and reported by the Judiciary Committee in last September. Only now it is being readied for possible floor action. So much for states' rights. Am I right? The Ron Show back after this on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, or wherever you podcast. If you listen to The Ron Show, by the way, on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, when it airs in real time, 9 to 10 a.m. or 5 to 6 p.m. weekdays, and you're thinking, wow, I just tuned in right in the middle of this. Good news, you can catch it anytime you want, listening to it via podcast on all the major podcast platforms, by the way, directly off the website at ronshowatl.com, too, where, by the way, you can drop a little donation, because this is all an out-of-pocket expense. You don't hear me airing commercials. You may hear them on America One Radio, AmericaOneRadio.com, but not within the show, mostly because I have a full-time job as a residential real estate agent, so I can't also drop the mic each morning and then go out and sell advertising. Oh, man. And I only have 44 and a half minutes anyway. I'd have to sell a lot of advertising. Nonetheless, visit the website, ronshowatl.com. That's where all the episodes show notes are. Every time I talk about something or read something as I am out of the political playbook, boom, cite it. Because I cite my sources. I am a college dropout who wanted to go to journalism school, but I was also editor of my high school newspaper. And actually, briefly for a little while in high school, printed a weekly newsletter for my hometown. I cite my sources. I know a little bit about journalism. I even wrote for 2 newspapers while in high school. That's right, high school and in college. I cite my sources. Anyway, ronshowatl.com if you ever want to hear an entire episode of the show, or of course you can follow The Ron Show on your preferred podcast platform. And we're on demand at progressivevoices.com each weekday as well. So back to the Politico playbook, where we're talking about how the Republican Party is hell-bent on destroying our justice system from the federal, state, and now even the local level with the assistance of these bootlickers of Donald Trump. By the way, I let you behind the curtain a little bit. I got stopped yesterday by Atlanta PD for I'm being accused of allegedly rolling through a stop sign. I didn't. The problem is from where the officer was coming. There are it's a T-shaped intersection, and I'm coming up the T and turning right. From his perspective, he can't see where the stop sign and the line drawn or painted on the asphalt is, that I had stopped way back before because of all the brush on the fence and the trees, and there were garbage cans on the corner. There's no way that officer could have seen where I had stopped and then pulled up and then rolled out. My explanation didn't assuage this officer, so he wrote me a ticket anyway, and in August, I'll go to court and make this case. And I'm going to make it with, get this, evidence. I went back, I shot video that showed this. I'll also have, I already do, have Google Earth imagery, a map that shows exactly the situation. I mean, I've got this all planned out. I'm getting out of this because I did not roll through a stop sign. Nonetheless, if I were Donald Trump, I guess what I would do is be hopping mad about this, run to Truth Social. I would be on Maria Bartiromo, maybe, I don't know, Judge Jeanine, knowing that Sean Hannity and the like would be railing against not me, not the system. Well, maybe the system eventually if I were found guilty. But first, let's go to the cop. What are the motivations of this cop? Do you see what I'm saying? We're just like, instead of me just going to court and making my case, which I'm going to do, and I'm, you know how traffic court works. It's my word against his, but I'm going with evidence. I'm going with the full weight of facts and data, knowledge. If I am guilty, or if I were guilty, I'd just pay the fine. I've done that before. By the way, there's a huge story we haven't touched on here yet, but I will at one point, where a lot of jurisdictions are using school zone cameras, by the way, to catch you if you go through a school zone and you go half a mile over the speed limit. They get a picture, you get a ticket in the mail, no points off your record or anything like that, unless it's egregious, I guess. And you have to pay the ticket. Got one of those a few months back. And my issue isn't so much that, okay, yeah, you got me via automation. My issue is that where's the blinking light on the school zone sign? Remember, we used to have school zone signs that blinked, that told you that you were within not only a school zone, but that the window of time that you were within the school zone was when the speed was being enforced. Yeah, we've got all the money in the world to put a camera on the school zone sign and to power that camera, but not the blinking lights that let us know that, hey, you're entering into a school zone and this is the window of time that this speed limit's being enforced. Kind of got it backwards, right? It's all about protecting the kids, is it? Or is it about generating the revenue? Because it seems like the power, literally the power, is being put into generating the revenue and not protecting the kids. Anyway, I got off topic here just a little bit. What I was trying to get to is that it seems as if Donald Trump were stopped for speeding, Congress on the right, Republicans in Congress, wouldn't say a thing about his driving reckless. No, they would talk about how the system is rigged, how everyone's out to get him, how the police department is weaponized. And they would do everything they could to dismantle the traffic court, for crying out loud. This is exactly what they're doing, but they're doing this on a higher level. Speaker Mike Johnson, back to the political playbook, has been in talks with Judiciary Chair and Trump ally Jim Jordan about using the appropriations process to target special counsel Jack Smith's probe. It's an apparent softening of his position. The speaker told us in an interview last month that he found a similar idea by Congressman Marjorie Taylor Greene unworkable. Now he's actually looking into it. That country certainly sees what's going on, and they don't want Fonnie Willis and Alvin Bragg and these kinds of folks to be able to continue to use grant dollars for targeting people in a political lawfare type of way. Jim Jordan told Politico. The problem, of course, is that these proposals don't yet have the votes to pass. One senior appropriator, Congressman Mike Simpson from Idaho, told Playbook, the idea of defunding Smith was stupid. I don't think it's a good idea unless you can show that they acted in bad faith or fraud or something like that, he said. They're just doing their job, even though I disagree with what they did. We accuse Democrats of weaponizing the justice system, said another skeptical senior Republican who was granted anonymity to speak with fear of MAGA blowback. Good God. We accuse Democrats of weaponizing the justice system. That's exactly what he'd be doing. That skeptical senior Republican who wished to remain anonymous to avoid MAGA blowback, told Politico's Playbook. This is The Ron Show on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, or wherever you podcast.
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
Now, as jaw-droppingly, breathtakingly hostile as Republicans in Congress have been towards state and local prosecutorial personnel and their powers at their respective offices, the Republican Party has turned a blind eye towards oversight in any way, shape, form, or fashion towards the U.S. Supreme Court, where apparently a lifetime appointment can be quite lucrative beyond just the pay that you're getting as a Supreme Court justice. This from 6 days ago on NBC News.
Tonight, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, for the first time, is officially disclosing a controversial 2019 trip to Bali with billionaire Harlan Crow. The acknowledgement out today in Thomas's annual financial disclosure report. It comes after a report last year from ProPublica that detailed his secret, lavish vacations paid for by the top Republican donor, who's a longtime friend of the justice. Thomas is also disclosing another trip that same year to California with Crow, though the report only includes lodging expenses, not travel costs. ProPublica reported Thomas had flown on Crow's private jet, a stark contrast to the more modest image the conservative justice has projected.
I prefer the Walmart parking lots to the beaches and things like that. There's something normal to me about it.
Now, NBC News gave all of 90 seconds to this story, but they left out the part where that RV that he's hopping around various Walmart parking lots to hang out in was also paid for by someone else, not him.
At the time, Thomas said the trips were a form of personal hospitality that justices did not have to report. Now, his disclosure report said the two trips had been inadvertently omitted from his 2019 report.
Oopsie.
As for his colleagues, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson reported receiving a $900,000 book advance, plus 4 concert tickets worth $3,700 from pop superstar Beyonce. And Justice Sonia Sotomayor disclosed $86,000 in book royalties. The Supreme Court adopted a new code of conduct last year, although critics say there's no way to enforce it.
And I'm sorry, I don't even like the way NBC News here tried to play the both sides argument here. Ketanji Brown Jackson got money for a book advance. She's going to be writing a book. She's working for that money. And Sonia Sotomayor got an advance, or not an advance, no, those are from book royalties. She actually wrote the book, and those are royalties that she earned from writing the book. What did Clarence Thomas do to earn all those vacations? To earn the $250,000, is it something around those, something along those lines? $250,000 or more expensive RV. What did he do to earn those from Harlan Crow? Or when Harlan Crow bought his, was it grandmother's house or his mother's house, let her stay in it rent-free, fix it up so that she could stay in, a nicer home, and then also bought adjacent property as well from the Thomas family at what I believe was higher than appraised value. What did Clarence Thomas do to earn that? That is the question. That is the question. And while Republicans are working so hard to be the big brother to come helicopter parent on down to state and local prosecutors because of their perceived weaponization of our justice system, Republicans have nothing to say about the bastardization of our highest court. Democratic efforts to impose a shred of accountability, writes the Daily Kos. And who was the reporter on this? Sorry, that would be Walter Einenkill. Democratic efforts to impose a shred of accountability on the Supreme Court failed in the Senate yesterday when South Carolina's Lindsey Graham, joined by some of his fellow Republicans, blocked the bill as he had threatened to do on Tuesday. Sheldon Whitehouse taking to the floor to make the argument that this is long overdue oversight of the nation's highest court.
First, let me thank the chairman of our committee for attempting to bring this bill to the floor and to get us on it, even though the Republicans have objected to Supreme Court ethics. It's important for us to continue to make the effort because the American people understand that there's something gone very wrong at the Supreme Court. The objections that we just heard amounted to a long excursion through a great variety of topics, through abortion, through past FBI investigations, through allegations about a two-tiered system of justice.
Oh, yeah, that.
Through wokeness, through things we all agree on, like separation of powers and an independent judiciary. I think it would be helpful to actually come into focus on what we're actually talking about here, because most of what was said in opposition to this bill is completely irrelevant to what we are seeking to achieve. We all accept the doctrine of separation of powers. Senator Blumenthal, who is here, is an expert in the subject. He's argued more cases in the Supreme Court than any other senator. To be clear, our bill does not make the Supreme Court subservient to Congress in any respect. The bill obliges the judicial branch of government to create its own ethics enforcement mechanism that will be run within the judicial branch of government by the judicial branch of government. There simply is not a separation of powers concern when the judicial branch of government runs an ethics program for the judicial branch of government that is administered within the judicial branch of government.
And by the way, the legislative branch of government has the same power on itself. But also, let's keep in mind, the legislative branch of government has oversight on the executive branch of government already. We know this because, well, they have impeachment powers. Back to Sheldon Whitehouse floor statement.
It just ain't so, Madam President. The existing state of affairs is that the ethics requirements that apply to the justices of the Supreme Court, first related to recusal, and second related to disclosure of gifts, are laws passed by Congress. And the enforcement, particularly of the disclosure requirements, is done by the Judicial Conference. The Judicial Conference is a body established by Congress. When Harlan Crow first started giving free yacht and jet travel secretly to Clarence Thomas, that question was taken up by the Judicial Conference a decade ago.
Wow.
Did the justices complain that the Judicial Conference was investigating Justice Thomas and his disclosures? No, of course not, because the argument would make no sense. So to hear it here on the Senate floor is a bit disappointing. Right now, the Judicial Conference investigates and can sanction or refer for further investigation justices of the Supreme Court. We are trying to fix three really simple problems. One is fact-finding. Fact-finding ought not to be an issue in dispute. Every member of government in the United States who is subject to any kind of supervision or ethics requirement, which is everybody, has a process whereby the actual facts are found of what went wrong. Hell, even the President of the United States had to sit for a fact-finding interview about the documents in his garage. It's only 9 people in the entirety of the United States government who think that they have no obligation to do any fact-finding. And that's pretty dangerous, because we just saw Justice Alito offer facts, a description about what went on behind his family flying MAGA battle flags over their houses that has been proven false by information that is incontestable. Police reports with dates showed that he got the order of things wrong. COVID showed that it couldn't possibly have been a school bus stop. So you have erroneous facts offered by Supreme Court justices with no method to review them, or they completely ignore the facts. Justice Thomas has refused to ever say a word about what he knew about his wife's engagement in the insurrection while he was adjudicating the rights of those investigating the insurrection.
That part.
There's nobody else in the world where somebody doesn't come in and say, "Sir, we have a complaint about your conduct, and we're going to need to take a statement from you. This won't take long. I'm going to ask you some questions. You give your answers. At the end, we'll ask you to review and sign your statement." Nothing difficult about that. Nothing against the separation of powers about that. Nothing that Chief Justice Roberts couldn't require right now about that. He could have Supreme Court staff attorneys conduct exactly that kind of work right now, as the chairman has repeatedly pointed out. Fact-finding is a really basic elemental proposition of our American judicial process, and it applies everywhere. It makes no sense for the body ultimately responsible for policing proper judicial process in the United States to not allow itself to participate in that most elemental and fundamental task of there being actual fact-finding. The second is a principle so old it's in Latin, for Pete's sake. Nemo judex in sua causa. No one should judge their own case.
Right.
That's pretty easy to understand. And yet we let these justices, alone in the United States, nobody else, get to be the judges of their own ethics. And obviously they have failed to measure up. And the third issue is transparency, disclosure. We know perfectly well that the justices have failed at their disclosure obligations, and they can't keep their stories straight about meeting their disclosure obligations. We just had Justice Thomas go back into his previous disclosures to correct them and tell the world and the Judicial Conference, which was reviewing this, that his failure to file was an accidental error. It was, quote, inadvertent.
Oops.
But earlier he'd said about the same gifts from the same billionaire, oh, those don't have to be reported. That was personal hospitality from a dear friend. Well, which is it? Is it personal hospitality that doesn't have to be reported? Or is it something that you knew perfectly well you should have reported, and now you're going back and cleaning up an error that you're claiming is inadvertent? The disclosure mistakes are inexcusable on their face. Federal officials who commit far less in the way of disclosure mistakes have actually been prosecuted as felons, as misdemeanants under the criminal law for those similar disclosure violations. So we need to get this right. All it requires is fact-finding and an independent voice, so it's not nemo judex. You're not judging your own cause. Those are really basic principles. That's all we're trying to do. It would be done by judges within the judiciary. There is no separation of powers issue. That is a complete canard. And I'll close by saying that the Judicial Conference has been helping us in all of this. The Judicial Conference has just blown up Justice Scalia's trick, which was to solicit through intermediaries free vacations from resort owners and then when the resort owner invited him with a personal invitation, he would pretend that that was personal hospitality because it was a personal invitation, even if he'd never met the resort owner. That is a preposterous reading of the personal hospitality exemption. And it's not just me saying that. The judges of the Judicial Conference said, you are right. That is preposterous. That is ridiculous. We are clarifying the rule that is not acceptable. And he had done it 60 times. He was a vacation-taking fiend, my Lord. Mm-hmm. So the idea that you can trust a Supreme Court justice with no independent review, no fact-finding, each the judge in his own cause, to follow the rules, has been blown to smithereens by the conduct of the Supreme Court justices themselves. As our chairman is fond of saying, this is a crisis in ethics at the Supreme Court that the Supreme Court itself has created. Yep. It is a crisis in ethics at the Supreme Court that Justice Roberts himself and the Judicial Conference can solve. But if they're not going to do it, we're going to do what we did before when we set up the Judicial Conference, when we set up the recusal laws, when we set up the disclosure laws. Set up the system and let the judiciary enforce it. I yield the floor.
All that conflict of interest, all the vacations, the yachts, the RV paid for, that actual conflicts of interest, Republicans have absolutely no interest in policing whatsoever or giving the judicial branch the authority to do it for themselves. But Fonnie Willis and Nathan Wade going out on a few dates over the course of a few months while working on the same side of a case, that's a conflict of interest. It makes no sense. You're listening to The Ron Show. Follow us on your preferred social media platform at Ron Show ATL. Here we are, the final stretches of The Ron Show for Thursday. I haven't really talked a whole lot about President Joe Biden's executive action with regards to asylum at our southern border. But you know what? I was watching NBC News last night that it occurred to me, I've been meaning to talk about this. And first of all, let me play the segment from NBC News last night before I weigh in.
Tonight, new evidence migrants who cross the border illegally are still being released into the U.S. by border agents, 1 week after President Biden signed an executive action suspending their entry.
If they choose to come without permission and against the law, they'll be restricted from receiving asylum and staying in the United States.
But NBC News has learned Border Patrol is still releasing many migrants into the U.S. who crossed illegally to pursue asylum claims. A senior DHS official tells NBC News those releases have dropped by more than half, but are still happening because agents don't have enough space to detain the large numbers of arriving migrants.
You know what would help that would be, what was it? There was like a bipartisan bill recently that folks in the House and the Senate were ready to act on before Donald Trump stepped in and said, no. I need that as a political wedge issue before and up to the election. So hold off on that. Don't solve that problem. Don't fix something that I need to run on fixing before I can be in office to fix it.
An internal memo to Border Patrol agents in San Diego directs agents there to release migrants into the United States unless they are from these 8 countries.
Those 8 countries being Mexico, Cuba, Honduras, Haiti, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Venezuela, and Guatemala. The nations where the vast majority of folks crossing the border illegally come from, actually.
Overall, illegal border crossings under the new policy are still high, but have dropped from 4,000 to 3,000 per day, DHS sources tell us. President Biden signed the executive action after fierce criticism of his handling of the border, with a record nearly 10 million migrants entering the U.S. since he took office.
Going to nitpick a little bit, some sloppy reporting. That's perhaps 10 million that have come, but most were turned back. They're not in the U.S. See, that's where the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world take a tidbit of information from a news report and go, oh my God, there's 10 million more illegals in the... No, most have been turned back, and that's something that this reporter should have stated.
But the Border Patrol Union says the president's new action is not tough enough.
It's status quo. Things have not changed. The executive order has not made any significant impact as it relates to the illegal border crossings.
That is the voice of Hector Garza,
We suffer a lot just to get here, says this Guatemalan woman waiting in Mexico to cross. And late today, immigration advocates suing, saying the asylum restrictions go too far.
This ban is patently illegal. The Trump administration enacted a near identical asylum ban. We sued over that. We won. We hope to win again.
That is attorney Lee Gellert. And I'm going to stop right there and put a pin in that because he's right. When Trump tried similar executive action, it failed in courts, and it will likely fail again. But I actually think President Joe Biden knows that. Let me let the story complete.
Senior DHS official tells us it's too soon to judge the new policy's effectiveness. They say they need more help from Congress to increase immigrant detention and do more deportation flights.
I feel like I'm that Leonardo DiCaprio meme where he's there, pointing at the screen. That's exactly what I think. I think President Joe Biden, honestly, and against his own best interest, if I'm being honest, because those on the left are not happy with this policy. I think President Biden, against his own best interests, chose this path of executive action knowing two things. One, it would be struck down in court. Two, that it would force Congress to act on it. And once struck down in courts, and we know Congress won't act on it, he can then say, I knew this. I knew this was going to happen. And that's why I need a Congress I can work with in an election cycle. I actually think that's what the Biden administration is doing. Old Sleepy Joe playing 3D chess while the monkeys are flipping over the checkerboard. I believe that is my... The problem with that is not only are Republicans, I believe, a step or two behind in this game, but I also think the American voter and those on the left are as well. Which is why I'm here to point this little nugget out. That's what I believe. I believe that the Biden administration knows that their policies, his executive action, is flying in the face of legality and our international treaties on asylum. And I think he knows that it's going to get struck down in the courts once lawsuits are filed, and why it took a week, but they did. They filed lawsuits. I think he's going to find out what he knew all along, that such executive action, similar to Trump's executive action, is going to be struck down in the court. And then he's going to say, this is why I've said all along, I need Congress to act on this. But my opponent called his friends in the House and Senate and said, delay that action. I need to run for office. And the southern border is a juicy, meaty subject for our base. And we all know that. Now, don't get me wrong. I think these executive actions are a gamble, perhaps a necessary gamble, but a gamble nonetheless. Because, again, we already know that Republicans in Congress, I think they even know. I believe that they have a hunch what the strategy is here. Because I literally think that is the Biden-Harris strategy here. Throw out some executive action that we know is illegal, will be struck down in the court, putting the onus back on Congress, and then Congress will do nothing and continue to allow immigration to be the... I think Republicans in Congress know this, but are also gambling themselves. I think this is a stare down. And the unfortunate part is, I'm not sure the American people, and polls show this, they show it with the economy and they show it with immigration for sure. I don't think the American people are as caught on and as caught up on where a lot of the blame lies on this issue. And that comes back to messaging. Charlamagne the God went off on the Daily Show last night about messaging, by the way. Would have loved to have given you some time on that today, but I'll have to save that perhaps for tomorrow. That'll do it for the Ron Show today. I am back tomorrow, 9 to 10 a.m. on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, or wherever you podcast. We replay 5 to 6 p.m. on America One Radio if you want to catch it then. Show notes at RonShowATL.com. See you tomorrow. Have a great Thursday.